Thank you for joining Jennifer Schaus and Associates and our 2019 Webinar Wednesday series. We're coming to you live from downtown Washington, D.C. Our webinars are every Wednesday, and you can find the upcoming schedule on our website. Past webinars and all recordings are also on our website and on our YouTube channel, along with over 160 other recordings on federal contracting topics. All are complimentary. If you have questions for our speaker today, you can email him directly with the contact information you'll see on the last slide. This is just a little bit about us. We are a Washington, D.C. based firm and provide services to federal contractors. This ranges from market analysis reports to proposal writing and also post-award compliance. More information is on our website, so please visit us there. We do offer advertising on our newsletter, so you can reach out at this email if you'd like more information on that. And our speaker today is Christopher Shiplett, and he's going to be going over HUBZone Special Advantages. Thank you for joining us today, Chris, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome. Good morning. My name is Chris Shiplett. I'm an attorney with Randolph Law. We are a government contracting boutique law firm. We help folks with all aspects of government contracting, set-aside programs such as HUBZones, 8A, woman-owned small business, bid protests, disputes with the government, disputes with subcontracting, evaluating and explaining regulations, and all of that type of stuff. Today, I'm going to talk about the special advantages of the HUBZone program. Now, I will tell you, although it's not in the slides, that this is almost a companion program to a 30-minute webinar that we just finished up that started at 11 this morning. I highly recommend that if you did not attend that or did not listen to this, that you go on our YouTube channel and you listen to that one, or you download the PowerPoint, because that particular webinar talks about how to apply for and how to maintain your HUBZone status. What we're going to talk about in this webinar is, once you have your HUBZone status, what are the advantages of it? Why would you apply for the HUBZone? So let's go ahead to the next slide, please. I'll briefly recap, and this is also in our HUBZone application webinar, what the HUBZone program is. It's a federal contracting program. It provides set-aside contracts and other benefits, which we'll talk about, to companies that are designated as quote-unquote HUBZone companies. It's monitored, or it's implemented by the U.S. Small Business Administration, the SBA. So all of your interaction with regards to HUBZone application, HUBZone requirements, HUBZone maintenance will be with the SBA. Next slide, please. Very briefly, there are 3 requirements for the program. You have to have 35% of your employees have to live in a HUBZone, and very briefly, a HUBZone is a census-designated area that has historically been underutilized. That's what HUB stands for, by businesses. They are designated and maintained and changed every 10 years after the decennial census. There's actually links in our other webinar. They aren't in this webinar, but there's links in our other webinar to the HUBZone maps, as well as a lot of explanation from the SBA about the HUBZone application process. That's what a HUBZone is. In order to qualify for the program, you have to be a small business. I'm working backwards up the slide. You have to be a small business as the SBA defines it. Your primary business location has to be in a HUBZone, and you have to have 35% of your employees living in a HUBZone. You then have to apply to the SBA, and the SBA has to accept and approve your application. And then every 3 years, you have to sort of it's not really reapply, but the SBA will come to you and say, you need to maintain your HUBZone. Please submit all of your documents again. That's what a HUBZone is. That's the basic requirements. Once you are a HUBZone registered company, and I will talk about the topic of this particular talk, which is what are the benefits of being in that program. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So let's start kind of at the very basics. And this is what's on this slide is true for every government set-aside program. And the government set-aside programs that I can think of offhand are the HUBZone, woman-owned small business, economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business, the 8A program, veteran-owned small business, and the service-disabled veteran-owned small business. And each set-aside program, when they are enacted into law, comes with a mandate that the government awards a certain percentage of all contracting dollars to that set-aside program. So in this case, the goal of the federal government as law is to award 3% of all contracting dollars across the entire federal government to HUBZone firms. The law then requires agencies to create plans, offices, and infrastructure to essentially implement that goal. So what that means is that each agency is themselves responsible for how they implement that goal. So different agencies will implement the goal in different ways. What that means for you is to figure out how much or in what way a particular agency implements the global federal government 3% contracting goal. You should speak with that agency's Office of Small Business, and they're actually called the OSBUs, Office of Small Business Utilization. They have a lot of great information about how the agency is implementing, what future contracts might be coming out, whether the agency is meeting the goals, and that type of thing. I've included a link here to an SBA document. It's a PDF. It's a very long PDF. I want to say it's 30 or 40 pages, and it gets into very minute detail about how certain agencies are implementing and whether they're successful or not about implementing the HUBZone requirements. It's a couple years out of date, but it's still an awesome resource to give very granular detail about what agencies are doing, and the reason that's important is once you know what the agencies are doing, then you know where to look for the opportunities, right? You're not just deep diving and data mining FBO for opportunities that are, already hard coded for somebody else, or were already awarded, or are going to be canceled halfway through the procurement process. You're actually starting to get good intel about what the agencies are actually doing. So that's sort of the broad overview of the basis of the program and what the federal government is required to do for HUBZone companies that have been approved by the SBA. Next slide, please. So then each agency, they have their own plans and their own guidelines for implementing this 3% goal, but there are essentially 3 tools that are available to them that are also available to you for implementing this goal. And these tools are the number 1 here I would call HUBZone designated contracts. That is individual opportunities that have been set aside to either be competed among only HUBZone companies or that are sole sourced to a company. And although those are on the same bullet point, I would say that competitive and sole source HUBZone opportunities are 2 different things, and I will talk about them separately. The second thing, and this is a regulatory mandate, is that for each full and open competition an agency creates, any HUBZone company must be given a 10% price evaluation preference. And then the third kind of area that you could take advantage of in terms of HUBZone is subcontracting opportunities, subcontracting either to other HUBZones or subcontracting to large companies. And we'll talk about kind of each of these in turn. Next slide, please. In terms of competitive set-aside opportunities, there's really 2 types of these opportunities. Number 1 is just individual opportunities. FBO, that's fedbizops.gov, fbo.gov, and that's the federal government's database of record for new opportunities. Agencies, because they have these internal goals, contracting shops will designate certain opportunities as HUBZone set aside. You can select to search for those, and you can compete on those individual opportunities. The quote-unquote pound the pavement part would be obviously your own business development where you are in with an agency. Maybe you already have a contract, or you already have kind of made introductions at an agency, and you're learning from that agency itself that certain opportunities will be set aside as HUBZone. Well, what does it mean to be set aside? Well, it means that you're only competing against other HUBZone companies, which means ultimately that your competition pool is limited. You're not competing against every possible company in the world. very importantly, although this isn't limited to HUBZones, it's all small businesses, you're not competing against the General Dynamics or the Northrop Grummans of the world. So you don't have to worry about going up against a behemoth, that says, listen, we have 150 years of past performance doing this exact thing, and therefore you're going to hire us. The competition pool is limited only to HUBZones, which is great because it makes it easier to win awards. And that's the case whether you discover the opportunity on FBO or you discover the opportunity through your own business development. Second piece of competitive set-asides is that oftentimes large IDIQs, and IDIQs are kind of these large task order-based contracts, some of them government-wide. These large IDIQs will have HUBZone set-aside components. So I've listed out 3 of them. I think some of them are old. I think SOUP's pretty old. I think Eagle 2 is about to be replaced. These are, and these are also technology contracts because that's my background and most of my client base. So that's what I'm most familiar with. But these are 3 government-wide acquisition vehicles, CIO SP3, NASA SOUP, which I believe is primarily for equipment, and Eagle 2, which may only be DHS-wide, but it's also, I think, for equipment. But these are very broad IDIQs that, because of their large size and large impact, have HUBZone subcomponents. So, for example, the next Eagle or the next CIO SP3 or some other one that I'm not thinking of, the next IDIQ, if you have the quals and you have the background, you can compete only in a HUBZone subcategory. Now, the reason these are separate from individual opportunities and as important, if not more important than individual opportunities, is that it seems to me that the agencies are using these IDIQs to meet their 3% goals more than they're using individual opportunities. Because individual opportunities, the requirements are so often set very specifically by what the government need is, and so contracting offices and clients are much, I guess, more risk averse to closing down the competition to only some particular set aside, in this case, HUBZone. So you'll find a lot more opportunities in IDIQs than you necessarily would in just an individual opportunity. Next slide, please. Excuse me, another opportunity for HUBZone set aside is a sole source. Now, this has a kind of different marketing and business development framework. Oftentimes with a sole source, what you will do is you will introduce yourself to the agency and you will demonstrate your capabilities before you bring up that you're a HUBZone company. And this is sort of the quote-unquote, how can we reach you question that agencies will ask. That is, you go in, you demo something, some technology or some product or something that you, or some service. Government loves it. They have some money for this very thing. They want it. They want you. Their next question is, how can we reach you? And what that means is, how can we simplify the acquisition process to get to you while still complying with our legal and regulatory requirements to compete this as much as possible? And and at that point you say, well, we're a HUBZone, so you do have the possibility of sole sourcing this to us. There's a key thing with the HUBZone sole sourcing that's actually same as woman-owned, same as veteran-owned, except in the VA, and that is that the contracting officer would have to write a justification for sole sourcing it. Now, they can justify and they can sole source up to typically $7 million, which is a very large contract for a small company, but they still have to justify it. So if you are working with an agency to shape the opportunity, or you have the opportunity to shape the opportunity, you have to make sure to explain how your product or your service is so unique, or your pricing included in that is so unique that it would not be possible to compete this, and the contracting officer can feel comfortable writing a justification to sole source it to you. So sole source opportunities are available to HUBZones. Oftentimes the business development posture of them is very different from FBO publicized opportunities or IDIQs. I note here that this is different from the SBA 8A sole source exemption, and I use that very specific example only because it's the 8A program is really the most, by far the most well-known of all of the set-aside programs, and the 8A's sole source exemption is very different from any other exemption. You can, a contracting officer can sole source up to, I think, $4 million, although it may have been recently increased, without justifying 8A. So you'll hear a lot about 8A sole sources, and even a contracting officer might say to you, well, why don't we just do it like we do 8As? And you would have to explain, no, 8As are $4 million, we're $7 million. 8As, if it's up to $4 million, you don't have to justify it here at any price unless it's under the simplified acquisition threshold of, like $150K. You still have to justify why you can't get to responsibility bidders. So you got competitive HUBZone set-asides, you got sole source HUBZone set-asides. Let's go ahead to the next slide. This one I have to put in here because it's in the program, it's in the regulations, but I think it is frankly almost useless. And that is that in full and open competition, a HUBZone company will receive a 10% price preference. So what does that mean? That means that if you are within 10% of any competitor, up to 10% more in price than any competitor that's not themselves a HUBZone, your price has to be deemed the lowest price. So if you bid $1 million, somebody else bids $950,000, your price doesn't change, but in the government's evaluation, they have to say, company A bid $950,000, company B, which is a HUBZone, bid $1 million. However, company B's price, as a matter of law, has to be deemed lower than company A's. The difficulty is that only gives you a good, solid advantage in a LPTA contract, a lowest price technically acceptable contract, so you go into an LPTA, you've written your technical proposal, you've provided your bid for your goods, and all then you have to worry about, so long as your proposal is acceptable, all you have to worry about at that point is your price the lowest? Bam, your 10% price preference in that case becomes very much very important, and it really weighs in. But if the evaluation is more of a best value trade-off, even though legally or by regulation your price will be quote unquote deemed lower, I don't think a contracting officer is going to look at that in the trade-off. The other thing is that, at least in my experience in doing bid protests, from what I've seen, a lot of times when it's a best value, the agency, no matter what they say in the evaluation criteria, the section M of RFPs, they almost always value the technical proposal significantly more than the price proposal. So what does that mean? Well, that means that if you're going after LPTAs, or if you're submitting bids for goods, right? You're a commercial vendor of, furniture or some other good, and this isn't a GSA schedule, then the 10% will be good for you because you can be aware that you get that flex. But if you're going after services or high value things where it's a best value or an LPTA, where it's a tough competition, I don't think the 10% price preference will be particularly useful. All right, next slide. So then the third one is subcontracting opportunities, and let's talk about this within two contexts. The first thing is that recently, as of I think 2 years ago, SBA changed their regulations for what's called the limitations on subcontracting. And the limitations on subcontracting means if a contract is set aside for a designated small business, small, woman-owned, HUBZone, 8A, veteran-owned, then that small business has to perform 51% of the work. Before the change, it was only that business itself had to perform 51% of the work. Now, after the change from a couple years ago, it's that business or any quote-unquote similarly situated subcontractor at any level has to perform 51% of the work. So what that means is if you don't have let's say you don't have a CIO SP3 HUBZone IDIQ. Well, you can go in, you can approach CIO SP3 holders who are HUBZones. You can say, look, we're a HUBZone, we'd love to work with you, here's our quals, here's our bona fides, let's go after this opportunity. That company goes after the opportunity, that company is the HUBZone, but it's not that if they win the opportunity, it's not that they have to perform 51% of the work, it's that they plus you have to perform 51% of the work. So that can often be a way, particularly if your company's very young, or if you're just getting your HUBZone, or if your quals don't go back that far, your past performance doesn't go back that far, that is a way that you can begin to use this HUBZone qualification really immediately, as you can find other more experienced HUBZones and offer to team up and partner up with them. The second piece is that large primes, even in full and open, on large contracts over a certain value, the primes are required to implement what's called a subcontracting plan. And what that subcontracting plan requires is that the primes sub out a certain percentage of the contract to various small businesses and set-aside businesses. So what you might have, you might have the biggest contract in the, space, right? And it goes to one of the behemoths of federal contracting. But as part of that company's award, that company will have to certify to the contracting officer that they intend to, utilize some percentage of small businesses, and that percentage won't necessarily be the same as the federal percentage. So the subcontracting plan for a particular large award might say, we're actually going to try and sub 10% of this to HUBZones. Or we're going to try and sub 10% of this to some small business within all of these different categories. The way you utilize that, or the way you use that, is that all of the largest federal contractors will have small business liaison offices by which they allow small businesses such as yourself to introduce themselves. They vet the small businesses. They try and match up the small businesses with the particular opportunities that they have under their subcontracting plans, and then try and connect you with the people who are actually managing the specific contract. So kind of two different ways to use your HUBZone, even if you are not trying to directly contract with the government. You can be a subcontractor to another HUBZone, or you can contact the small business offices of each of these various large contractors. Next slide, please. So really, I think to sum up, a HUBZone is no different from any other competitive differentiator, right? It's the same as any of the other small business set-asides. I'd say it's also very similar to having a GSA schedule or to having one of these IDIQ contracts. When you go into an opportunity, you can say, when the government says, how can we reach you? You can say, well, we're a HUBZone. So if that helps and you guys need to meet your goals for HUBZone, you can give us the contract that will help you meet the goals. The different ways to do it, you want to team or partner with other companies, either partner with HUBZones or partner with large businesses, or also partner with businesses with the quals for the particular agency and opportunity you're pursuing, where you're the one bringing in as the prime the HUBZone and they're bringing the quals. You need to identify the opportunities from a technical point of view, and you can also look to IDIQs and look to subcontracting. Those are various ways that you can use your HUBZone to your advantage if you get your HUBZone certification. I have seen several companies that their business strategy is to very highly leverage their HUBZone qualifications, and they have successfully done it. I think the big thing with HUBZones is that there aren't that many of them in any individual area of work. The flip side of that is the government doesn't have a lot of HUBZone opportunities. It's not nearly as large as 8A. It's not nearly as large as woman-owned. It's particularly not nearly as large as veteran-owned. But if you are able to get your HUBZone certification, you'll find that the pool of potential competitors is very, very small, and it can be a very, very valuable addition to kind of your competitive repertoire. That's it for me on HUBZones. Thank you very, very much for your time, and I hope it was useful and informative.
Thank you, Chris, for joining us today. If you have any questions, you can reach out to him with the email or phone number shown on your screen. And this concludes the webinar. Thank you.